But who was buying off these rulers in bribery so that they were captured without a bow? They put up no struggle. They put up no fight. This is called the Valley of Vision. All right? The translation of Gehazi's name is Valley of Vision. And he was Elisha's servant, and Elisha dwelt in Dothan, which means two reservoir. What are we going to read in Isaiah 22 about two reservoir? Watch what it says. This is all about Solomon and what Solomon did. All right? What does it say? It says, therefore I said, look away from me. Let me weep bitter tears. Do not labor to comfort me concerning the destruction of the daughter of my people. This was the casting down of the daughter of Zion. And we're told of that casting down all in this chapter, which is all about what King Solomon was doing, all right, to the wall of David his father when he walled up the breaches, all right. It states he built a palace for his wives. Now we're going to get into that palace because it is mentioned in this chapter. That's the interesting thing. It's all about what King Solomon did. And the occult world comes to exalt the key of Solomon. All right? We are to exalt the key of David. That's what we're to do. All right? But what does it speak of the reservoir and what? It says he, or it tries to say the Lord? No. The he here is Solomon. What did he do to the reservoir? What does it say? Verse 11. Ye made also a ditch between the two walls for the water of the old pool. But ye have not looked unto the maker thereof, neither had respect unto him that fashioned it long ago. Look at that. We're looking at two here. We're looking at two cisterns. We're actually looking at two reservoirs that was brought on by the actions of what King Solomon was doing. All right? Now, I'm sorry, I'm not explaining this the way I want it to. I'm really not. I did such a much better job last night when I was sitting in my chair. I was doing it so much better. But what does it say about the palace that Solomon was building for his wives? Remember, we linked this all in the key of David to him tearing the houses down of the widow women from Israel whose birthright was on the wall or within the vicinity of the wall of David. The key of David we recognized as these daughters that pass back and forth through the gates, which is called breaches, but it's the gates that belong to these daughters. They were the key of the daughters of Zion, was the key of David to pass back and forth and made righteous decrees, where in the palace that was really the place where they worshipped Mother God. And you're going to say, well, you can't connect that. Oh, yes, I can. This is amazing detail. And it is all there. For anybody who wants to actually go in and take a look at the detail. It's amazing. What does it say of his house, of this palace, in Isaiah 22? Nobody's going to not make me believe that Gehazi wasn't a traitor. Elisha, as his servant, he would have lived with Elisha or very near Elijah, which puts him in Dothan. Dothan means two cisterns or two wells. Here we have the daughter of Zion being cast down. The rulers themselves had turned on them. They were casting them down. Somebody was in there leading them. Somebody was in there with briberies. Somebody. And it's spoken of, those briberies are spoken of, again, like I said, in Isaiah 30. Am I going the right way? In Isaiah 30, what did it say? And it's not just there that it speaks of the bribes. It speaks of it over and over again. It says, woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out. It actually links us to the word weave into libation, water, pouring out false doctrine and weaving it together. They began to do this over the entire globe, is what it looks like. And it says they took bribery. I believe it should have been the second verse I wrote down too, that they took bribes. And here they were captured without bow. They were captured without bow because they had already agreed to bow down and worship the hosts of heaven, which was going to exalt the harlot spirit by exalting man, allowing man to govern himself. That's why it was imperative that Gehazi get under Elisha so that he could begin to understand what the covering was of Judah, which is mentioned here in Isaiah 22. It says, watch this. And it shall come to pass that thy choicest valley shall be full of chariots, and the horsemen shall set themselves in array at the gate. Verse 7 of Isaiah 22. Watch verse 8. And he, this is Solomon, because Solomon had Gehazi infiltrating Elisha, I believe, infiltrated into that camp, and he was a traitor spy, or he came to be. And it's important because you see, verse 8 says, and he discovered the covering of Judah. It may well be Gehazi that's being spoken of here, or Solomon, because Gehazi had it revealed to him when Elisha prayed to the Lord that Gehazi's eyes would be open so that he might bear witness to the great host that was surrounding them and protecting them. What he bore witness to in the spirit there, I believe, was the feminine power. And he saw it with his own eyes. And it says here, and he discovered, remember we're looking at the valley of vision, which translates to Gehazi's name. He was from Dothan, being under Elisha as a servant. Dothan means two cisterns, two reservoirs. And who split them? Who split the waters? And that's taking us right back to the allegory of the two women in Galatians 4, which represents two spirits, two covenants. Go read Galatians 4. And he discovered the covering of Judah, and thou didst look in that day to the armor of the house of the forest. Look how they got it translated here. Let's read a different translation. The Lord stripped away. No. Solomon. It says he removed. No. He, Solomon did remove, but the Lord allowed it because the men were casting off a covenant with the righteous spirit. We're told of that in Zechariah 11, where God instructs the daughter Zion that she was working through to place her name on one of the staffs and to break it, symbolizing a breaking of the covenant with the righteous spirit, which was represented by the righteous daughter Zion. So the Lord here, for the Lord, it was a distressing day for her to leave her daughters, her righteous daughters, because man no longer wanted the righteous spirit and covenant. And she says in Zechariah 11, she says, give them the implements or the devices of a wicked shepherd. She said, fine, they don't want a covenant with us. Let them have what they want. They want to bring on their own death and devise their own downfall. Let them. We'll give them what they want. And so here it says, he removed the defenses of Judah, and on that day you looked to the weapons in the house of the forest. Here in this verse it says, the Lord stripped away the defenses of Judah, and you looked in that day to the weapons in the palace of the forest. Guess what I found on the palace of the forest? This would have been the palace that King Solomon built for his harlot wives. I'm going the wrong way. I'm glad I labeled these. So I found a link, and I'll put it below, on the house of the forest of Lebanon. That's what this is here, all right? In this verse of Isaiah 22, the Lord stripped away the defenses of Judah. What defended Judah? What's called the stronghold of Judah? The stronghold of Judah was the daughter Zion, which is described in Song of Songs as a stronghold. She's described as a palace. She's described in many different ways as the land that gives life to the body. She's described in so many various ways, and you're going to get your understanding to all of those allegories in Song of Songs. But she's described as a palace and as a stronghold for Judah. Here, the Lord stripped away, or he, Solomon, stripped away, because of what Gehazi discovered. And you can say, well, Gehazi wasn't even existent when King Solomon was. I don't really know. I'm telling you what the scriptures is leading me through the Spirit to understand. All right? And you can say I'm wrong, That's fine. If you don't want to go in and study the key of David, nobody's going to make you go in and understand it. But it all links back to those houses that King Solomon tore down. And Jeroboam came against him because his mother owned one of these houses. It was her birthright. And these daughters' birthright, the righteous spirit, they were representing the righteous spirit. It was their birthright to make the laws on Mount Zion. That's what it was. And this is all about what Solomon did when he decided to tear those houses down, and he built up the harlot spirit, is what he was doing. And he built a great palace. And the Lord stripped away the defenses of Judah, which was the daughter Zion. And you looked in that day to the weapons in the palace of the forest. Who would have been the weapons here? Well, it would have been the harlot spirit with the harlot word, but that harlot word had already been taught to them by Solomon. And that's where we find it in Habakkuk 2:15. It says, you got her drunk on wine, on drink, and it says, so that thou could expose her nakedness. This is the stripping away of the defenses of Judah, which is described as the stronghold of daughter Zion. And he chose a covenant and was in marriage. He married the daughter of Babylon, is basically what you're looking at. And she becomes the harlot spirit that gets exalted within man's heart. And they begin to weave this doctrine. We're going to take a look at that if I got time. So here we are at the palace of the forest. It's known as the house of the forest of Lebanon. All right? And it was one of the buildings included in Solomon's palace in Jerusalem. All right? And they speculate on what it was and all of this detail. I'll put the link below. Very interesting. It's not a lot of detail, but it's very telling. It was named for the cedar pillars, which had been imported from Mount Lebanon and resembled a forest. This palace resembled a forest made from the trees of Lebanon, trees that had been cut down in Lebanon. What did we learn about those men that wielded axes like men in a forest on that day? That takes us to what they were doing to the house of worship. This is what we're concluding here. The house of worship that the daughters of Zion met in to worship Mother and to make the laws and carry out daily court proceedings is what it looks like. And they would assemble in this palace or in this house of the forest of Lebanon. All right? And they there would worship Mother God, and they would bring her decrees to the nation of Israel and Judah, which was known as Israel, the woman's seed, one. But they became separated as two nations, Judah the south, Israel the north. The two in Judah, the two tribes in Judah, and the 10 in the north. Judah's typically the male, Israel's typically the female. The female got shut out of her rightful place in this body when Solomon decided to daub up the gateway and lock in the harlot spirit. And here we get reference to he turned to the weapons in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Psalm 74 speaks of what was done to this palace in this day that was going on. But we'll keep looking at it. It says it describes the house, the Bible describes it as 100 by 50 cubits. It was divided by 4 or 3, according to the Septuagint, rows of pillars with an upper story and chambers distributed in rows of 15. Let me finish reading this. Because they don't know what the house was for. This is what they state. It says they have sought for an explanation for the function of this house, of this palace. It has eluded scholars for centuries, for millennia. They do not know what the function of this palace was, the purpose that it served. This is what is so fascinating about this. And Solomon, because it's clearly linked to Solomon, looked to the weapons that was in this house. It's interesting, he also had a footstool made. And it's the one time that footstool is referred to in a very negative context. Now that's interesting because we're also led to Christ footstool as a footstool, and it says God forgot her footstool in the day that she cast down the daughter of Zion. Footstool pops up there in in Lamentations chapter 2 again.